Tell me, do we have time for another number?
Oh, I think so, Jimmy. What tone do you have in mind?
Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of Drinking Matters. My name is Bryan, and with me, returning guest from about maybe 2-3 weeks ago, I want to say, my good friend.
It was a month. Yeah.
A month? Has it been? Oh, it's been a month. Yeah, it has. My friend Dom.
There's no time. Yeah. Hi.
With
Hi,
what's
everyone.
going on? No, there's just no concept of time.
No passage of time at all.
Thank you so much, Dom, for coming back onto the show, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
And, before we actually started recording, because we're actually doing this whole thing again where we're streaming this on IG Live as we're recording. We're kind of trying this out. I think between the two of us, we got a pretty good, system going on. We had some technical difficulties because we've been trying to figure out if we can actually stream this entire thing through our computer webcams, and it turns out that there's like third-party softwares that just aren't working with us, and so on and so forth. And we've been messing with tech for the last 30 minutes, so that's been fun. That's been great.
Yeah.
Other than
it's
that,
been a learning experience for the both of us.
It has been, and you know what? I find it extremely funny that tech is the topic for today. So
I know, it's like the taboo of tech just kind of like cursed us in this.
It's like technology understood what was going on, and they were like, you know what?
Yeah.
We're not going to let you expose us anymore.
No, screw you guys.
Screw coming out with the truth. They're not going to do that.
Yeah.
So, this has been it's been a fun experience. I think just going with these live podcasts on IG. It's something that I continuously say that I keep wanting to do. If this is something, to the listeners listening to this now and possibly in the future, once this goes up on YouTube, if you guys are interested in live versions of this, I can always try to figure out a way to possibly stream these things on IG and have it just run through there. And there's a way. I mean, there's a way. Tech.
I'm sure there's a way.
Yeah, with tech, there's always a way of doing it. But if not, maybe possibly doing it on YouTube. That could always be a possibility.
Any other software that's more willing to be convenient would be great.
So there's ways of doing it. We just got to figure out. I got to figure out how to do this. So if there's anything like that, any feedback, we can always try to work things out. Maybe stream this on YouTube, so that way it's a little bit easier. I know that there is a big audience on IG, so that could always just be a thing. It's just a matter of trying to figure these things out. So with that said, I think the best way to approach the beginning of this podcast would be to ask how you've been. I mean, you've been away. I haven't heard from you in about a month.
Yeah.
No, I've heard from you, but I think.
Yeah. No,
you know what I mean.
I've been, at home mostly.
Mm-hmm.
I was just working from home now, because things are starting to close down. It's kind of, going back to the swing of things back in March, when this whole thing started.
Wave 1.5. Basically, of what's going on,
pretty much.
Which is it's not even a joking matter at this point, man. I thought we were no, but laugh slightly. No, it's like ridiculous, man. You'd think that maybe things would slightly improve, but then everything just immediately, as soon as everything's opened up, back up, all the way up. It's just ridiculous. Seriously. Man. It's to me, it's just disappointing to hear that people aren't even referring to this as the second wave. It's like still continuing wave 1, which is scary. But what can you do, man? People are going to be people, and they just won't listen. But I mean, as long as you're staying safe, you're at home, you're working from home, right? You said that?
Yeah.
And how's that been for you?
Luckily, I'm able to work from home. Like, some tasks are like not stuff in the wet lab that I'm able to take home and just kind of do remotely. So yeah, it's been an experience. It's been good. Yeah, definitely. How are you been?
Well, I've been busy. I've been working, and I've been working on the podcast and helping produce my friend's podcast as well. So there's that.
Yeah, you got like a couple.
I've got a lot, and you know what? On the way out from work today, because I've been thinking about what the discussion for today, and I think when was it that we hung out at what was it, the Cellar? This was like last year, right?
Yeah, 2019, I think.
It keeps popping in my head how you continuously want to push for what is it? How did you say it? Um, like science education or science communication. Excuse me, science
Yeah, yeah,
communication.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And so that's always been a topic that's interesting to me. Ever since we spoke about it last month too, it's like I love to talk about it because I feel like people know about it, but they just don't know how to necessarily approach it because they
No,
think like,
yeah, I completely agree, especially like during these times when science communication problems are so evident in front of us right now. It's definitely
continues to
something
be.
that's, yeah,
Continues massively, massively.
yeah,
That
for
was,
sure.
yeah, for our listeners, he was on, I say, so it was about a month ago, last
Yeah,
week, so this
yeah,
is
yeah.
episode 15. I would say, I think it'd be episode 10 or 11 that you were on. It was where we talked about the CDC and health and science literacy from a research perspective. So if you guys are interested and want to listen to that tidbit before jumping on and moving forward with this episode, I would highly recommend it because we will be kind of transitioning back and forth from that topic to the topic that we are talking now.
Hmm.
And just like I said before we started recording, uh, or when we started recording, if you guys are interested in following any of our socials, the links are in the description below. And usually when Dom comes in, we always try to aim for some sort of live broadcasting. So if you happen to catch us on IG, or maybe in the future, possibly even on YouTube, just go ahead, follow us there, and that way you can actually interact with us as we talk about this. Because the last episode we had a couple good questions, and they were pretty interesting. It helped us move
Hmm.
the conversation a little bit forward. So there's
Oh
always
yeah, for
that.
sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm slowly building this up to what I want it to be, and thank you to Dom, for encouraging pushing this into a live format. So I mean, yeah, just give us a follow and let us know. You guys can ask us questions if you join the live conversation as well. That's pretty much something
Yeah,
that'd be super interesting to do.
and maybe like hold each other accountable and whatnot, just in case any of us spews out any unintended misinformation or whatnot.
It was kind of funny because I think last time my friend Frank showed up and he actually asked us the question. I don't want to misquote how he said it, but it was an interesting question because I think he brought up certain uh, what was it? It was something along the lines of oh, I'm going blank. He asked an interesting question. I remember that
Hmm. Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
regards to pretty much how he sees health and science literacy, um, and it was. I'm at a loss words. I can't even think. I can't
Yeah,
even
yeah,
remember what
yeah.
was going on. But it was an
I'm
interesting
sure you
question.
could like intercut something or something,
Yeah, of
but
course, yeah. But yeah, so he asked us an interesting question and it helped us move forward. We answered it, and yeah, it was interesting. So yeah, again, if you're listening to us, follow us on our IGs, Twitters, anything like that. When we go live, we'll post it, and hopefully in the future it'll be something better.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
Dom, are we ready to move forward with this conversation?
Yes, please.
Perfect. All
Yeah,
right, we ready? We got our drinks. I don't know. I saw.
we do.
Okay, perfect. Cheers,
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
friend. Before we start anything, cheers. Ooh, a Starbucks frap. That
I
is
know.
comfy.
Oh, I'm kind of mixing it with some of this Bailey's I've had. So,
Hey, that's
yeah,
good. That's good. All right, I'm on. I got my Guinness. I'm good. It's been a long day for me, so
yeah.
relaxing mode. But with that said, as mentioned earlier in this episode, we are going to be talking about technological advancements in regards to health, science, and medicine. This is transitioning over from the previous episode where I had Dom on, and this is in regards to pretty much health and science literacy within society. We mentioned it slightly in the previous episode. We wanted to kind of discuss pretty much what we think of its progression, how it's affected it, if it's good, if it's bad, just different aspects of it. So I guess to start, um, let's see. No, Joey. Sorry, my dog. There's gonna be
Hi,
little noises in the
Joey.
back. All right, so I have a couple questions ready to kind of move this conversation forward.
Yeah, yeah.
So the first question: if health and science literacy are an issue in society, does modern technology have the tools necessary to increase the literacy? I think we slightly kind of discussed it in the previous episode. I would
Mm-hmm.
like to expand on it a little bit more.
Yeah, of course.
So, from your
Did you
perspective,
want to start or? Oh, I can
go
start.
for it.
Yeah.
Go for it. As my
Okay,
guest,
okay.
I'll let you go first.
So I mentioned how influential social media can be for, pushing for
Hmm.
um, credible and good science and health communication. I wanted to just reemphasize on that. Like, we have a whole new set of younger scientists who are like they're the younger millennials, they're the older Gen Z folk, that are really like being creative in terms of the use of technology and pushing for good science. We mentioned that the one of the downsides of the social media aspect is that there are these people who have an agenda or some sort of thing that will spread misinformation because they have that platform available.
Uh-huh.
But now with like this resurgence of new young scientists who are basically like my age, maybe your age, um, now they're populating this sort of misinformation swamp filled with better, probably hopefully, um, holding these misinformation posts and stuff accountable. Um, yeah, so definitely like in terms of technology, it's social media and social networking is definitely having its perks
Mm-hmm.
for younger scientists. Because I
So,
mean, these people have been growing with social media for
yeah.
probably since high school,
Okay.
and so
So let me ask you this, because you said pretty much the younger generation of scientists are going in. This is pretty much how you feel, that the younger generation of scientists are able to pretty much distribute this information that they found a lot easier to the public.
right.
Now, when it comes to that, do you think that social media pretty much kind of splits up different generations and kind of gives people the, how can I say it? It splits up generations and makes it so that certain generations aren't able to access that information a
Yeah.
lot easier.
No, yeah, for sure. And that's definitely an important topic that we'll bring up later in terms of disparities between this accessibility
Mm-hmm,
of this health literacy.
mm-hmm,
And yeah, unfortunately, there's definitely that aspect in technology that, like people who are not as so able-bodied or maybe as um, well versed in technology and social media
mm-hmm.
won't have this platform to go towards.
So we keep mentioning the word social media. So this is in regards to things like Facebook and Instagram, Twitter,
Yeah,
things like that.
Facebook, Instagram. I have a couple colleagues who, even use TikTok as forms of science communication and health communication as well.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, you don't have any boomers or any like older generations using TikTok for that.
No, they use older
Yeah.
formats pretty much. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
like
the question that
basically
Frank asked. Now I
Facebook.
remember. Yes, I was going to
Yeah.
mention Facebook. That's the question Frank asked. He said that because now it just came into my head when we were discussing pretty much tools that schools kind of distribute to students, but it's blocked
Mhm.
behind paid walls.
Right.
Their archives essentially, pretty much. So that was the question he asked, and pretty much saying that it's kind of difficult to access that information, and so what are people supposed to do?
Mhm.
Yeah, so it definitely is, an issue in that regards as well. Um, but pretty much when we discuss social media and stuff like that, you brought up Facebook. Facebook is one of those kind of notorious platforms to essentially house a lot of the older generation. So you have, a lot of pseudoscience coming out from Facebook. And it ends up hurting the general public. There's a lot
Oh
of,
yeah, for sure.
yeah. So,
Like
because,
tons of anti-vaxxer groups.
mm-hmm.
Definitely some movements in like anti-masking now.
Oh, anti-masking is ridiculous. I think it probably the worst we were ever gonna get was anti-vaxxers, but then anti-max or masking is that's another
Yeah.
beast, man. That is
Yeah.
ridiculous how far these
And
people
yeah,
go.
so and that's one of the problems with like this whole networking thing
Mm-hmm.
in terms of health communication. Like even though we have this technology to our hands to do good, oftentimes it might be well intended, but it might, spread more misinformation and more bad crap.
More bad crap. Way to put it.
Yeah.
Would you consider things like YouTube a social media platform as well, or is that more of a platform that is generally used for media distribution?
I definitely think that yeah, so YouTube, because I mean I haven't been too well versed in like the YouTube sphere of things, but it's more pushing mediums and not so much networking
Mm-hmm.
within it, unless there's like the live thing where you're coordinating between users and people can pop in, ask questions, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
The only reason I ask is because it's kind of. Let me see if I can find them. I don't know if his name's Dr. Mike or something on YouTube,
Right.
but
No, yeah, because while you're doing that, I can actually talk about some of the ways that some science communicators have been utilizing YouTube. Um, yeah, so like like Ken Jeong had his own channel.
mhm.
You have ASAP Science doing their thing.
ASAP Science, there you go. Yeah.
There's like a ton of people using this medium to disperse information.
Hmm.
Um, because I mean, we've as a society like evolved immediately after like the production of like film and television, so we're a very visual society afterwards. So something like YouTube, where you can talk to people through visuals or through um, like webcams,
Hmm.
it definitely like lends itself to this sort of information dispersal in terms of health communication.
Counterpoint to this, I wouldn't say maybe a counterpoint, but I would say something to bring along. I don't think for me personally, seeing society as more of like a visual, um, that they are visual learners, the way I see, information being distributed, because you mentioned like ASAP Science. Dr. Mike is the guy that I found on YouTube. That's the one that
Mhm.
is he was on Philip DeFranco's podcast as well. But Dr. Mike, ASAP Science, you have Neil deGrasse Tyson with his astrology podcast and stuff like that. Um, it's more of easy accessibility and
Yes.
possibly easy digestion of the information. Because when we think about it, how often do we see and pay attention to media that's longer than 30-ish minutes?
Yeah.
And it, like,
No, I
yeah,
completely agree.
it's kind of difficult for
It's
some people. When
hmm
we think of like longer than 30 minutes, we're thinking about movies and stuff like that, right? Um, and most people, how many times do we see most people just jump on and watch an IG story? That's what? How long is it? 10 seconds?
yeah.
And
I
most
mean,
YouTube videos are
no.
10 minutes long and stuff like that. It's just the
hmm
easy digestion of information. And so that's why I think that when we talk about, modern technology and does it have the ability to increase it, the literacy of science and health, yes, it does, because you're able to just take these massive chunks of information and cut it off into tiny portions that can be digested into society a lot easier.
Right.
Counterpoint to that, though, I just as beneficial as it is to
As it is to
society.
distribute that
Yes,
information,
it's
like
also,
how do it's important to consider how someone does that.
yes, and that's the
Um,
dangers
yeah.
of it as well.
Yeah.
Just as it is just as is. Oh my God, why can I not speak? Just as beneficial as it is, it can also be the pretty much crippling blow to society. Because
Right.
again, we're
Yeah.
mentioning pseudosciences in Facebook, and how easy is it to distribute that information? Oh well, if you don't want to wear a mask, then you know what? Wearing a mask, that lowers your oxygen levels. So stop wearing it, and that information gets spread on Facebook tremendously.
Like
Like,
wildfire.
fire,
Wildfire. Yeah. Yeah.
wildfire, pretty much. It's like
Yeah.
incredible how quickly that passed on. What was it? My girlfriend showed me a photo of an Etsy shop owner that was pretty much trying to sell these masks that were meshed, so they pretty much
I've
exposed.
seen those.
Yes,
There's like it's like a tiny little aneurysm in my head
it's like
sometimes.
ridiculous, and it's kind of not to
Oh, so for
explode.
the people who haven't seen it, the effective use of a face mask, is has a pretty good cloth mesh to block water droplets. But people, who have voiced their complaints about how difficult it is to breathe in this, have developed this sort of mesh. It's almost like instead of like a wooden fence, it's a wire fence,
Yeah,
and like random crap can just like go
it's
through.
easier to breathe through the mask, even though it has been proven that oxygen levels do not drop when you're wearing a mask.
No.
But people don't listen, so they want to buy these stupid meshed masks. And it was funny because it was my girlfriend who showed me that photo, and she never cusses. And when she shared it on her story, she's like, "Excuse my language, but what is this fuckery?" And I'm like, "Oh, see, that's when you start pissing off people like that. That's when you know that
Yeah,
you've done wrong."
for sure.
To go back on the question, though, does modern technology have the tools necessary to increase the literacy? Yes,
Right.
I think it does. My opinion wise, more than anything, it does have the tools necessary. We're able to cut off massive journals and articles important for science education and distribute it to the public, in adequate chunks, pretty much, something that's
Right.
easily digestible to them, but also in ways that aren't so aggressive and so difficult for certain people to understand. Because we
Mm-hmm.
mentioned this in the last podcast. We said that certain articles and journals have a language that's very difficult for most
Right.
people to understand. We said that journals have abstracts and discussions and talks about the errors, experimentation, what they use for their data, their breakdown of graphs, and then the conclusion, and it all seems repetitive, and most people,
It's very overwhelming for
yeah,
sure, especially in terms of the jargon. It's basically having to learn a second language
yes,
almost. And if
there
you're
is
not
a,
trained in that,
yeah,
then you're just kind of left hanging
exactly.
dry.
So there's ways of trying to learn about and read these articles, but I think that that's where technology comes into play. You
Yeah.
have to have ways of distributing this information easier for the people, so one, they don't get bored, and two, it's a lot more understanding for those people as well.
Mm-hmm.
On your end, do you have anything to add about having
Yeah,
the
so speaking of
increase?
like trying to maintain the attention of the consumer, um, one of the technologies available to us now is kind of like this intersection between art and science. So, especially when you're talking about, for me, this is important because I'm a biological researcher, but when you're talking about biological processes, it's really hard to kind of see things in like a sheet of paper, the text, like, yes, you can follow through and try to visualize it in your head, but if you have like really high quality 3D animations or graphics
Uh-huh.
of this, um, then science communicators have that to their advantage to, push for hopefully better accessibility and understanding this whatever biological process they're trying to depict.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, in regards to the next question, I think we kind of somewhat answered this in the previous question, which is, are
Right.
technological advancements beneficial in the sciences? Um, we've pretty much discussed it. We said, yes, it is something that's extremely beneficial. You're able to cut everything, distribute it easier, pretty much all said and done. But as a researcher, Dom, do you feel like these technological advancements are beneficial towards, your field of work? Again,
Oh,
you are a
like,
neurobiologist, right?
yes,
Yes, that's
I
your
am a
field.
neurobiologist. I do mostly do wet lab work,
Uh huh.
so I'm working with tissue primarily, but there are some research questions that, cells or animal studies can't answer. For example, computational neuroscience is a field that isn't wet lab. It's more data driven and driven by computer models.
Mm-hmm.
And like this, especially like the past decade, computer computational modeling has driven so many more interesting research questions that are can be answered beyond the use of, you know, live tissue or any wet lab
Mm-hmm.
work, basically on the computer. And I was just reading an article that sort of looked at the ways that patients with autism spectrum disorder sort of process sensory stimuli.
Uh huh.
And the interesting fact was that they had this really great story in which they saw a behavioral observation. They kind of correlated that observation with human brain imaging studies. So they used fMRI to look at neural activity. And in attempts to try to understand what's going on, they actually created computational models based on previous theories and sort of just kind of they were able to switch off various theories or various aspects of the model based on what theory they were working with.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in this particular paper, they found that computational models that um, sort of include a particular parameter. I'm trying to remember what it was. Okay, so um, basically, without getting too much into the science of it, um, something happens in the brains of individuals with autism where their sensory stimuli becomes or their sensory neurons become more sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And like you can't really study that in an animal or in a human due to ethics and whatnot. You can barely kind of create like a cell experiment that can accurately model this. So what they did is they used computational data because our brains are so similar to computers that they were able to create this model, and they found that once they sort of ran this computational model, it sort of replicated some of the observations they found
So you're
in the
talking about
behavior in the human.
simulation, a
Yeah,
simulation.
basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot in a lot of research, especially when you talk about ethics. Should you even experiment on human beings or animals, especially now that science is trying to move away from animal experimentation? You're trying to use simulation to replicate data or outcomes that you want to try to produce.
Right.
Now, my next question is this: do you feel like with the technological advancements, there is a burden to have better results and push experimentation to another level?
Right.
Obviously,
And
with sciences, you do want to continuously experiment and better those
yeah.
experiments. That's an obvious,
No, yeah, for
thing
sure.
from science. But when you talk about, software that's able to simulate certain experimentations, are you do you feel like this field is kind of having the burden of keeping up with those upgrades and those advancements? And do you ever feel like it could possibly be overwhelming for research at some point?
Um,
Especially
so I
with some research
guess
taking a really long time.
yeah. No, yeah, for sure. And the reason why usually they take a long time is um, based on wet lab data. So like tissue experiments, animal experiments, and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
With a computer, obviously it takes a little bit quicker. The only problem is that its effectiveness kind of is based on the current understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have an experiment where you're trying to, I'm kind of like losing my train of thought a little bit, but
It's the
um,
indoors, I'm telling you, man. It's the
I know.
indoors.
What am I trying to say? So I'm trying to say that like there are things in tissue or in animals that can't be properly replicated in computers. And so that's why it's usually best to, come through this in a very interdisciplinary perspective where you have a side of the research question that can be answered through computer simulations and another side that takes into account whatever it is that they find in the computer simulations and put that in the context of a working, functional collection of cells, like animal or um, something.
Pretty much kind of what's the word I'm looking for? You want to grab the simulation and pretty much parallel it to actual experimentation
Yeah,
on live
right,
subjects. Like
right.
explain why this simulation is accurate to possibly even experimenting on a live subject. If you're
Or
testing
maybe inaccurate to it.
or
So
inaccurate,
you
yeah.
can, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can see why. Okay, so like this is everything is supposed to work out, but why isn't this working in, animal studies?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the animal, there's other considerations being involved that isn't being taken into account in the computer simulation.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Um,
And that's where those articles become a little bit more confusing because now not only are
yeah.
you presenting the data from the simulations, but now you're also trying to explain how this parallels to live experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you said it,
Yeah, for sure.
autism and stimulating certain parts of the brain can't necessarily do it ethically because on live subjects. You can't really,
No, no.
especially in,
But you
modern
can,
times.
yeah, but you can possibly simulate it through computers,
Yeah.
and that's the advantage that that has. So I guess it's just in terms of what is the research question that you're trying to answer, and in what way can you answer that?
Okay.
Um, yeah.
So
Um,
I think
yeah.
this will go back into the whole learning perspective of how technological advancements are beneficial to science learning, I guess you could say, because now you're talking about simulation and paralleling that to live experimentation. Can you transition that with the technological advancements in pretty much discussing it to the people in public, if this is even something that is worth talking about? I guess you could say that's kind of is it? Did I mention that
So
confusingly, or is that
so let me try to. Let me see if I can sort of frame the question. So what you're saying is because because we have so many like technologies to our advantage, trying to communicate the importance of those technologies to the public and learning
mm-hmm.
is a challenge.
Yes?
Okay, got it. All right. Um, I think so.
It's you know what? I think we're mentally kind of exhausted trying to figure out all this tech on our side to make it
Yeah.
work. So
Oh,
we're
no, no,
just
no.
like,
Actually, I kind of have a pretty good anecdote about that. So my
huh.
current project right now is sort of data driven. Um, right now, what we're doing is we're using human data from human database, which is the tech side of things, um, and sort of based on whatever like patterns of genetics that we can find in these human um, data samples of Alzheimer's disease, we're trying to sort of have like this backward, forward feedback loop,
Mm-hmm.
and so that the human data and can influence the way that we sort of not create, but we sort of edit some of the genes in mice to better mimic the human data.
Okay.
So you have that sort of feedback loop in which the innovation of the um, mouse models that we're trying to create is being driven by the human data that we're collecting.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, then yeah, so we have parallels going in trying to answer this one question: how do we better model Alzheimer's disease for better therapeutics in the future?
Mm-hmm. Now, with that sort of information, it'll go back to this kind of. I kind of want to revisit something that a channel that you mentioned, like
Mm-hmm.
ASAP Science, for example, because I've been subscribed to their channel for a couple of years now, and discussing pretty much what you were talking about. This is something interesting that they would probably even tackle and try to explain to us. So, in terms of technological advancements and stuff like that, I don't think that we would have been able to talk about this if it wasn't for these technological advancements.
Yeah.
Specifically, between the two of us, not to say that we're like, oh, we're, higher intellectual beings and whatnot, and, this will completely
Far
make sense.
from that.
Far from
that.
it. We still have a lot to learn. But it's interesting to see how we're able to discuss this and possibly even give this information to the public and have other people come out and give this information a lot easier to people to make it better and I don't want to keep saying easier, but more digestible,
More accessible, yeah.
Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. My God, what is wrong with this, man? It's Friday.
I think it was the technology issues that we were kind of dealing with.
We're just like over tech. We're like, you know what? Tech is just stupid at this point. Who needs it?
Yeah.
And that's when everything decides to shut down. And if we haven't learned anything from the Terminators, no. Just shouldn't mess with them. At this point. All right. So I want to revisit something that you kind of said that we were going to revisit. I think it's about time, especially since we're at the halfway point of the podcast already. The disparities between age and technological advancements. That is something that is massive, and I don't think that it even is just related to health and science literacy and education. This goes beyond everything else. When you try to implement technology.
Not just age though, right? Because there's just so many problems and disparities that kind of go along gender, racial, socioeconomic lines in terms of tech, especially in like health communication. There's just so many problems with it that it's funny that you mentioned like screw tech, because that's how I feel about right now or the past couple months. It's like screw freaking technology.
You just wish that everything connected all at once, but then you even said it. It's like, oh yeah, but do you want businesses to share data, and they're not going to do it. It's just impossible sometimes to even like try to make things work. But you are 100% right. It's not just the age disparity. There's a lot of them. There's gender, socioeconomic are two of them. But I think the biggest one that most people talk about is the age disparity.
Right.
When you have, our generation compared to the Gen Zers, is it the Gen? Yeah, the Zoomers is what they call them. That's what they joke about it. So the Gen Zers are the younger ones, and then they compare it to us, and then compare us to the previous generation and the generation beforehand, the Boomers. You start to notice that there is a less.
Yeah, I'm thinking of. There's like this joke kind of thing where it's like, back in my day, we didn't use telephones. Well, back in the 1700s or whatnot, we used pen and quill.
Back in my day, the computers didn't have archives of library books. You had to go and use the Dewey Decimal System for the libraries and stuff like that. Oh my God, man. No, you don't realize how beneficial tech is. As much as we hate it when it doesn't work, we forget how beneficial it is to everyday living at this point.
Absolutely.
I always mention this. 10 years ago, I was 16. So no, you know what? We'll go further back. 15 years ago, at age 11, going into high school-ish, 7th, 8th grade, what kind of phones did we have? We had these massive brick phones that were like probably about 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Couldn't access the internet, nothing like that. But
no, I feared for my life when I tried to access the internet. I was like, oh crap, the extra 50 cents.
No, back up. I remember doing that in high school because I what did I have? I had like the LG Envy or something like that. It was like a flip phone. It was like a touchscreen on the front, and then you flip it on the
I remember
inside.
like the Sidekick was a thing too.
That was a big one. Yeah. And now those phones allowed you to access the internet, but there was like always a button that you could press, and it brought you into like the weather or something. You're like, no, that's 50 cents. My mom's gonna know, and you're gonna get in trouble for it.
Yeah.
But 15 years ago, we barely had access to the internet with our phones, and now look at our phones now. They're basically minuscule.
They can
computers.
launch a rocket, pretty much.
Yes. Yeah.
I
think that this is kind of mentioned before, that the tech that was able to launch the rocket and lead it into the moon is pretty much comparable to something that we have on our phones now. It's ridiculous how fast it's evolved within 15 years. But with those sorts of advancements, you have a massive difference between what older generation can use and what we can use. And not to make it seem like we're old, because I'm barely 26. You're early 20s, no? You know what I mean?
23,
23, like 23, 26. When you look at how the younger kids in their like 10s, 11s, and 12 are able to use technology, don't you notice that there's a difference in how they manage to use things and how we manage to use things?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, like, if we just like bring this back to the COVID-19 situation in terms of how people were transitioning well into Zoom to do online learning, online meetings, like, like my friend was kind of just talking about how most of the issues that he had to deal with, because he worked in IT in his department. So a lot of that just came from, older generations not being able to access or be able to understand some of the ways that Zoom worked.
Yeah, and it's a big issue, especially with what's going on now. What is it? Most school systems now are trying to transition into online learning, and one of the big issues that we're kind of hearing about right now is that a lot of teachers and professors are having issues trying to figure out how to properly make a Zoom phone call. Right. Or, and here's the thing, this is something that I've kind of slightly tried to figure out why. I was always under the impression that there were other safer methods of communicating and possibly even allowing, people to communicate one another, for online learning purposes. You have things like YouTube. This is already a well-established platform. If you want something live, you have Discord. Skype is something. Skype was like maybe 10 years ago. That was like the popular thing that everyone used. Now most people are using Discord, and Discord more recently wants to transition out of that gamer mentality and say, like, you know what, we're not just a gaming sphere anymore. We want to make sure that this is a site that pretty much anyone can use. And so I think that they want to transition into more of a communications kind of platform so that people are able to communicate. But with new things come out like Zoom, you have the possibility of people alluding that there's different causes, like background causes, I guess you can say, that might lead to quote-unquote dangers. Zoom supposedly hacks into your private data and is able to figure some stuff out, and there's always this fear which kind of pushes away certain generations from using it, or even try to encourage other people to use it.
There's definitely like that paranoia, especially for those of the older generation who grew up not really understanding the way that this technology works. Of some sort of hacker coming in and being sensitive with that data that you're providing. And I think, I don't know, maybe our generation is just more careless, or maybe we just put too much trust and reliance on.
Is that a bad thing though? Because okay, so
what do you think?
So let me put it this way. The reason I kind of say that, I wouldn't say that it's difficult to kind of even assume that if we just focus on our generation, okay? If we're only going to focus on our generation, it's difficult to say that our generation is careless, because sometimes you speak to some people that are technologically savvy and understand what certain things mean. Do you allow this application to access your microphone or your photos and all these other things? Sometimes we don't. I would tell you right now that a majority of the people probably don't. read any terms of services, or they
No.
don't, or they just click
No.
allow on everything,
Yeah.
right? So there's all these different things, right? But when it comes down to the consequences afterwards, that's when our generation gets on it like super quick.
Right. And that
Snapchat.
makes sense.
Snapchat.
Yeah.
A couple years back, got in trouble because supposedly those photos were supposed to only be saved for 24 hours. And how did they get caught? Or what did they get caught for? For saving photos and videos of users on a private server, which then got hacked into and then leaked out publicly.
Right.
That's when our generation struck and said, you know what? This isn't what you said. Oh, but the terms and services. No. I don't care about the terms and services. You pretty much use all this legal, mumbo jumbo to essentially try to bag up, certain things that we didn't even know about. Yeah. So our generation is very pretty much savvy when it comes to trying to figure out how to get out of the consequences. We are not so smart in trying to prevent the consequences from happening.
No, yeah, for sure.
When it
that actually kind of, I don't know if this is actually related to it, but sort of. Like 23andMe had this whole or similar, DNA databases and tests to see your ancestry or whatnot. They definitely had a lot of issues in terms of your biometric data that you're given out, and in terms
this whole thing where they're like, oh, they're saving your DNA for like future testing to clone you and whatnot. Did you hear about that?
Sort of. I'm not surprised that people raise that point, but
at this point, anything could become a conspiracy.
But they were like giving the biodata to companies to sort of screen for any like diseases that they might be able to determine based on genetics. And without the proper information to be distributed to the consumer, it's like, this is where your stuff is going to. It definitely gained a bunch of traction and a bunch of pushback since then.
The pushback is the dangerous part of it, though, because the pushback pretty much disallows certain things to keep growing. I'm only going to use this example because it's relatable to me, but I'll bring back the topic of YouTube again. YouTube, I think, is one of those platforms that's very useful for educating the public in terms of science and health education. Pretty much the channels that you mentioned, I already knew or followed because of YouTube. And, sometimes you don't even think about how often you play something on there. Like, for me, at least, I don't watch any more TV. If I want to watch a movie, I'll watch Netflix. I'll watch Hulu. If I want to watch a TV show, there's other apps for that on the TV. But if I'm simply doing something like, maybe a quick, maybe 10-minute, 15-minute video while I'm on my lunch at work, I pull up YouTube. And there's educational stuff on there. Pushback comes from previous generations that are very skeptical about what's going on over there. And that's where I feel like the danger comes in. Because you're like, I don't know if you've heard, but YouTube has had multiple controversies over the last couple of years in terms of what should be easily accessible to children and what shouldn't. Are you familiar with that at all?
Right. Like, if you just go on this related videos thread, right, you like end up in not so great places.
Yes, exactly. What was it?
I think it had to do with ISIS or something.
Elsa. It was Elsa Gate, I think is what it was called. ISIS was another issue. ISIS was another issue. That was a couple years back. But the whole Elsa Gate thing from Frozen was because they were using cartoon characters to easily appeal to children, and then these videos would be live action sexual role plays of adults dressing up as these characters and doing really messed up stuff. If you dig into it, Dom, I'll guarantee you will not come out the same person you was before. God. It's terrible.
Well, and that's the thing with like having this, technology available for everyone. It's available for everyone.
Yeah, it is. And that pushback prevents certain people from getting access into those things. Because think about how beneficial it would be. Okay, as a kid, can you remember what kind of shows you used to watch that used to teach you or encourage you to learn about sciences?
Mythbusters.
Mythbusters.
Easy one. With the recent passing of Grant. Yeah.
Bill Nye the Science Guy. You have Mythbusters, Bill Nye the Science Guy. But those were tools and shows that were given to us that encouraged you to learn about those sciences, right? Same thing with me. Well, YouTube is that network that allows, the younger generation to easily access that information. But when you have older generations say, oh, well, you know what, it's not a safe area because there's this, and that, and, I'm too busy to, you know,
Yeah.
allow these kids to essentially like, you know, to watch what they're watching, and no, then you're preventing these tools from being accessible to younger generations
Oh yeah,
and
I completely
encourage
agree.
the learning process of, you know, improving health and science literacy amongst society with these technological tools that we have now.
Mm.
A question to go along with this: can an organization or company do something to decrease said disparities if they exist? Do you feel like there's anything that any company or organization can do to try to decrease the age gap between the two, or the age gap, or socioeconomic statuses, anything like that? Socioeconomic status, I feel, is like another closely related one.
Yeah, and so is race.
Yeah.
Is yeah, it's
How
oh
so?
god.
Actually, explain the
Uh,
race. The race.
okay, so a lot of this kind of discussion, it's always been in um, sort of on the backside of some uh, back and forth discussions, but recently after the whole Black Lives Matter movement going on, it's really been pushed harder because a lot of technology now sometimes don't even recognize like race or gender in the same way that they might do with perhaps white populations.
Okay.
So I have one of the examples I had is some voice recognition software have more word error rates for African American voices compared to white voices, and
Like
that was
accent
controlled
wise.
in.
Like accents,
Sorry?
right? Accents?
No, it's actually more like acoustics wise.
What? I've heard about
Yeah, so they
accents, but I haven't heard
controlled
about
it.
that.
No, so they controlled it for they controlled it for accents. They controlled it for African American vernacular. They controlled region dialects as well, but all of this was very similar to the white controls or white population that they, had participants for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when they went down to it, is really just differences in acoustics and, you know, like things that you would expect, or I guess you would expect someone in more the software development side of things to kind of make note of or at least be aware of.
Uh huh.
But since, like if they're like control or if they're um, test simulations for this sort of technology doesn't include a diverse panel of voices, and it's really difficult to kind of foresee these things
Uh
from
huh.
occurring. There was this really great spoken piece on it um, that I can probably post in some of the descriptions that we'll send out eventually. But another one was also facial recognition.
Oh,
There's some
that I know.
facial
Yeah.
ID software, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
facial ID software inaccurately that inaccurately ID black women compared to white male counterparts. And this was seen across like IBM, Microsoft, etc. And yeah, so like just the lack of diversity in like training images and the way that these technology can be screened for inaccuracies is not to par for the populations that they're trying to represent, if that can make sense.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense because you're trying to make it accessible to as many people as possible,
Right.
and the
And if
fact that
you're
it's
like
closing out some people or some
yeah,
groups essentially from even using these tools effectively, you're preventing these individuals and groups from progressing and keeping up with the
right.
rest of the
So
demographic.
in terms of what companies can do, obviously the big one is increase diversity in their team. Because like I mean, the probably the norm in Silicon Valley is white or East Asian.
Hmm.
Um, Without a diverse team of people coming from multiple backgrounds, they won't be able like these people develop stuff based on their own personal experiences, right? So if you have a diverse team who realize like that that piece of tech isn't recognizing what I'm saying or isn't recognizing my own
Hmm.
facial ID, then obviously like you have this sense of accountability and whatnot. And there's actually this great quote from the main researcher who looked into these disparities between gender and race in terms of the facial ID.
Hmm.
Her name is Joy Bualavini. I hope I said that right. I do not want to mispronounce your name at all. She said that we have entered an age of automation, overconfident yet underprepared. If we fail to make ethical and inclusive artificial intelligence, we risk losing gains made in civil rights and gender equity under the guise of machine neutrality. Um, and so, yeah, so like, yes, technology is supposed to be impartial, but there's this whole raging discussion in who makes this impartial, like and whether that process is being inclusive of
Okay.
everyone. And so that goes in with the age disparities too. Like, you would want to test these products, with multiple ages, so that multiple ages and multiple abilities to use this product can be represented in this.
Now, wouldn't you think that companies would get pushback if they continuously spend money on testing over and over and over again? Not to say that I'm disagreeing with you. I agree with you.
No,
But this is more of like a question that most people would ask because testing costs money.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, most software, right? They release updates and whatnot. So I would, like, in my mind, I'm thinking if they did reach pushback, then they could, sort of try to improve it. Hopefully, it's a software thing and not really hardware. But it'd just be a update and just like, bing, hey, we updated this, and here's why.
To try to
Hopefully
better format some stuff.
Yeah.
To kind of piggyback on that point that you just made, I feel like most companies just need to take some accountability for it. Because you are right. I've seen and heard about these, not to the level that you explained it, but that there is, certain issues with AI essentially not recognizing certain acoustics of different ethnical backgrounds and stuff like that. But this is where I feel like most of the population needs to kind of understand a little bit more about how technological advancements work within our society. So that way we can hold these companies accountable for, backtracking or not even progressing certain certain advancements. Whenever we notice this sort of whenever we notice, a bump within a piece of tech or software, what do? We immediately notify the company through
we complain about it, or
we complain about it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And so that encourages these companies to continuously test. I think one of the issues that society kind of has, the thing that's preventing them from moving forward is their inability to separate complaints with reports, if that makes sense.
No, that does.
It's one thing to continuously say, this piece of tech does not recognize my voice, therefore I don't want to use it, and company A is complete garbage, and you should stop using it. We see this all the time when it comes to Android and Apple, Android, iOS, those two different softwares for phones. It's just direct competition between the two, and it just kind of seems like a war zone that's a joke, but also we see competition there. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if society really wants to kind of fix these issues where they really want to try to improve and lower these disparities, they need to take action and essentially tell these companies that it isn't okay for certain software to not recognize different acoustics, to increase ethical awareness, or ethnical
Both.
awareness,
Both.
ethical and ethnical awareness,
Yeah.
when it comes to their usage as well. Because if a company doesn't see any point in developing better software for it, they're just going to move on to the next best thing. And you bring up an excellent point with AI. We've reached a point, AI right now is barely at its early stages, as much as we pretty much look at our phones now and think like, oh, well, you know what, Google AI and Siri and Alexa and Cortana on Windows, like all these different AI softwares that are out there, they're really great because they recognize their voice and stuff like that. They're still in early development. We still have another 30, 40, 50 years before they even become anywhere near what we keep seeing in science fiction and stuff like that. Do you ever feel, and I know that there's other two questions, but we're kind of running low on time, and I do want to mention this.
Yeah, we have about less than 5 minutes.
You know what? Well, we can extend a little bit, like 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
This is an interesting thing when it comes to AI. Especially, I mean, it's in public, it's in society now. We use it for anything. If we wanted to schedule something, we would just say the magic
Um,
words.
Before we move on to that, can I
Uh-huh.
just say a point towards the consumer
Yes, yes,
complaints and
go for it.
everything?
Go for it.
Um, it's also important not to just put the burden of like keeping companies accountable within the consumer's end.
Uh-huh.
We need to keep companies accountable within their end as well. Like we need the developers to know that this is an issue themselves, and you know, like take action against that.
And that's where
So
society needs to step up, though,
yeah,
because
yeah,
developers are not going to see a concern as a moral concern. They're going to see
mm-hmm,
concerns as a money loss or a money gain.
right,
And that's where I have the issue, where if society says these acoustics aren't being read by your program, this needs to get fixed. If there is no
mm-hmm,
money gain for the developers, then they're not going to find any interest for it, which
right,
is why and I feel like I'm going to get chewed on by this, but that's why competition exists, because you're going to have other companies come in and develop better software that might read
yeah.
acoustics
Oh, no, I
better.
agree.
And that encourages other companies to say, like, oh, well, we're losing on this demographic. Okay, we got to get this demographic back. We got to find a way to improve this, and so they'll continue to improve it. We'll continue to improve it, and so that'll push for better software in the end.
Right.
So it comes both ways, where society does need to step up and hold these developers accountable to improve technology, to encourage better learning and distribution of education from a science and health perspective. But we need to find the right language to speak to them.
Agreed.
Developers and
Agreed.
organizations speak money. They don't speak moral concerns. To them, it doesn't matter if you or I can't use a piece of tech if we are in the minority for some group. It just matters that they have the money to continue and pushing better software and possibly even evolve. That's just pretty much how it is, and it's why industries like YouTube still exist. They are the biggest giant when it comes to online videos.
Yeah.
They need competition if they want to improve. Right now, you're seeing a lot of issues where they keep canceling
Oh no, yeah,
and
like
censoring stuff
if
like
you
that.
have something like, I think this is a good point in terms of monopolies like Disney. There's no like quality check of entertainment now,
No,
just
there isn't.
because Disney owns everything.
It's
But
it's
sorry, going on to the question, the next topic
the
of
AI
interest that you
portion of
had.
it.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah,
so AI is massive, and then I was reading one of your articles that you sent. This one caught me on. This one got me. The 4 big ideas that highlight technology impact on research, and excuse me, to our listeners, I'm gonna link all the articles that Dom sent me. Thank you,
yeah.
by the way, for providing this information. I'm gonna link them in the description below. They're Google Doc links, essentially. They're links on a Google Doc that'll essentially send you to these different articles that kind of go in depth about our conversation, what we had today. But this one, the 4 big ideas that highlight technology impact on research, is the one that struck me the hardest, and
Okay.
mainly for that. Yes,
So before that, let's just say bye to the Instagram
it'll cut
and
off
just
right
remind
now.
them. Yeah. No.
Go for it. Go
The
for it.
video will continue. Yeah, the podcast will continue on in YouTube or Spotify, wherever you'll find it. So
Just
if it
in
cuts off,
case it
that's
cuts off.
why.
Just in case,
Yeah,
because you know what? We've been having these cuts. Like last time, I think we went
yeah,
on for over an hour, and it just like dropped, and we're like, oh, what's going on?
yeah, yeah,
But just
yeah.
in case,
So it'll
yes.
happen in 5 seconds. But okay, go ahead.
Oh, you actually have a timer on there?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, well,
And it's cut.
and done. Cool. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. So that means that we've hit the hour mark. That was fun. That was a fun IG live.
for sure.
But you know what? Yeah,
Sorry,
just like Dom
continue
was
about
saying.
your talk.
Got it done? Good?
Yeah.
Okay. This is just going to be a quick 10-minute discussion, pretty much just kind of going about with the whole AI portion of it. There was a point on there that says we need AI as scientific partners. Pretty much kind of explaining on the idea that AI is beneficial for research development because it's able to access and pretty much run data quicker than what we would normally run.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like AI is headed in a direction that will be extremely beneficial research-wise and even education-wise? We'll start with the research perspective of it. From your perspective, do you feel like AI will be beneficial as it keeps progressing, or do you think that it's going to eventually lead towards laziness, something,
Mm,
negative aspects of research and stuff like that.
well, okay, so I can't really see the educational advancements that AI might bring at the moment.
Uh-huh.
I definitely can see it in terms of research and more tech development, I guess. And in that end, like, yeah, there's like machine learning and programming languages that enable machine learning for better diagnosing and treatment
Hmm.
of various diseases. So like if you're given like a chart of an X-ray or an MRI and you like select out a region of interest, then like there's
It'll detect
yeah, it'll
some,
detect whatever
yeah.
it is based on previous databases that it's accessing.
So the only reason I bring this question up is because in most journals and articles, there's always a discussion of margins of error,
Hmm.
essentially, and you always want to have the smallest margin of error
Right.
in terms of that. You never want to have anything bigger. Ah, man, I'm trying to remember how my grant writing class was saying, but it was like either like no more than like point. Oh man, I don't want to say because I don't want to
Yeah.
if say like no, you're completely wrong. It's not that. It should have been a smaller margin of error. It's like a .05 or something like that.
A
From what
small margin error,
a
basically
small
just a small margin
yes,
of
we'll
error.
we'll
Yeah.
keep it to that way, but it's like a
Yeah.
small margin of error that they always want to keep. And so you're trusting now computer technology and software to do this data, this run of data for you. Do you ever feel like there is a fear that software might produce, are we going to see more mistakes as we rely more on technology for research advancements?
I mean, it could very well be. I mean, like even with just human stuff, we're seeing so many mistakes
Yeah,
being given out. So like if we can't hold ourselves to that level, how can we hold AI, something that, is so abstract to us right now,
because
to
we
that
believe
level?
in it. We
Yeah.
believe in it. I mean, look at how we use AI now. When we say the magic word and we tell it, hey, can you set up an appointment for this and an alarm? And the AI doesn't register, but we have that kind of mentality where it's like AI is 100% right. It has not let
Hmm.
me down. And then it doesn't turn on your alarm or
Yeah.
it doesn't notify you of a thing. We kind of feel like, well, what the heck? What is it? Like we feel aggravated by these sorts of things. So I can only imagine the level,
Anxiety.
yeah, the
Yeah.
anxiety or
Especially when you're like diagnosing a disease, you really want to make sure that,
we
this
have,
doesn't make a
yes,
mistake.
that's perfect. That's
Yeah.
a perfect example of it in the medical field. If an AI is supposed to detect some sort of abnormality within a person, and you're putting that much faith into a computer to essentially say yes, this person has a disease or a viral infection or whatever it is, is should society have the anxiety or the fear that we might be too reliant on AI and its advancements?
Right.
Do you?
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think about this?
All right. So let me give you my idea on this.
Yeah, what's your rundown of
I
this?
have so
Because I
I've
mean,
yes.
you before with all this, you said you mentioned that there's this whole electronic system happening in your hospital. Is that related to
Wait, what
this
do you
sort
mean?
of topic? You were talking about um electronic charting,
Oh,
or
within hospitals. Yes.
yes.
Oh, okay, 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 okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, not to give out as much information as possible. And now I know I was like, what are you talking? What are you electronic charting? I know what you're talking. But not to give too much information, for fear of just kind of keeping everything as it is. But I I have experience with hospital work, and I will say that the hospital that I work at has moved on. I think most, I would say, have actually have moved on to electronic charting,
Mm-hmm.
and so but I don't think that uses AI.
Oh, okay. Well, then
Yeah, I
there
was
goes
starting to
that
think it's
topic.
like no, because it's still connected to it that you have the reliance of technology to have
Yeah.
everything there, and there have been moments where our entire system crashes because of some sort of update or
Mm-hmm.
some sort of rework that needs to be done, and then all of a sudden now you have an entire facility that has to revert back to paper,
Yeah.
pen and paper, and the chaos that happens to it is alarming. sometimes, because now you have people that are so used to just using,
Mm.
electronics and stuff like that. See, I'm going to connect it here. This is how
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
going to
yeah.
connect it. But
Good,
you
good,
have
good.
you have newer generation of medical personnel coming in so accustomed to using technology for their work that when that system fails, they look at pen and paper and start asking themselves, well, how can we distribute this information quicker to this person here who might need it for, testing
Yeah.
or, diagnosis and stuff like that. It just becomes alarming at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my kind of fear that I have with AI advancements, that you become so reliant on something else doing the work for you because it's so easier. We forget to realize that sometimes there will be downfalls and there will be, points where it just doesn't work. So
Right.
now what does that generation do? Do we revert back and teach them the ways of pen and paper or older formats on how to do things? I believe so. I still think it's
For
important
sure.
to hold on to those previous uses of, managing information, because tech can't really be relied on 100%. We see it in science fiction all the time. And I know that
Yeah,
we're
that's like the
mentioning
basis of most science fiction
most science
stories. It's
fiction,
just
yeah.
like the tech went haywire and whatnot.
Tech
But
went haywire
yeah,
and it's now
yeah.
attacking humans and stuff.
Mhm.
It's like all these
No, but I
different things.
definitely think that I don't. I I'm not so confident in the fact that future generations will be complacent to the technology that they have. Well, maybe, because I mean I'm kind of seeing it now a little bit. But yeah, like I I sure would hope that future generations would be taught, like in case
In
things,
case it goes down.
don't work in
Mm-hmm.
AI, yeah, like this is usually how you would just go about it, and if not, then yeah,
Can't
like
rely on AI
yeah,
too much, because again,
no,
it'll continuously fail. It's always going to improve and improve and improve,
yeah,
but there's always going to be downfalls to it. As far as distributing information to the
about AI,
public about health and sciences,
yeah,
I think that AI could be 100% beneficial.
mm-hmm.
Because when you think of, let me ask you this to wrap it up. What is your definition of AI, and what would be an example of it?
Oh God,
The first thing that comes to your head.
so I guess my definition of AI is more related to machine learning,
Uh huh.
in the fact that it's building or it's applying knowledge based on previous data sets
Uh huh.
or previous databases,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm not, I don't know how confident I am about AI sort of creating new data sets
Okay.
and whatnot. Like, yeah, so I guess my kind of comfort level with AI is just kind of keeping it in its own box of machine learning.
Have you
Um,
ever seen the Google presentation where they like try to showcase what their Google AI could potentially be like in the next 5 years or so? Where it makes a phone call to a hair salon for you and it talks like a normal person?
oh God.
I'll show you that at the end. Once we stop recording, I'm
Yeah,
gonna send you
yeah,
the
yeah.
link to that video, because
Okay.
it's to me it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But a lot of
Hmm.
people that I showed, they're like, "Yeah, no, I don't want that." Um, let me let me let me add on to something here.
Hmm.
Okay, so do you use AI at all? Any form of
I don't
artificial
know.
intelligence?
Probably
You have
at
an
some
iPhone.
point.
You have an iPhone, right?
In terms of the research lab, yeah, I do.
Okay.
In terms of research, no, but I guess personal life,
Yes, somewhat.
yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So
Not that I know of, which is why communication and health science or science communication is so important for this.
So AI kind of exists all over the place to the point where it can even try to determine the best possible things that you might even want to watch on any sort of
Right,
platform.
right.
So
That's the
you have
whole
these
like
different, yeah,
promoted ads and whatnot.
exactly that's how they're able to promote. Oh, you
Hmm.
looked up a chair on Amazon. Great, let me show you these other things. It's able to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
upkeep and remember, your search history and stuff like that, and it's able to showcase all those different things. I think that it's important to progress AI in terms of trying to increase education amongst the younger generation,
Hmm.
because again, when we mentioned this whole thing about parents, or older generations pushing away certain platforms because they're not comfortable with it or they don't know about it, if they themselves don't want to do the work, then possibly letting a computer AI do that work for them could be beneficial if it's done morally correct. And that just brings up a whole nother topic of like, oh, well, what do you define as morally correct?
Because and like, who designs this AI?
Yeah.
How do they determine whether like
do we let companies decide what kids want to watch and how and what they should watch? You know, what if they start pushing advertisement because a company will be a company? There's all these sorts of different things that we can keep going down. There's all these different avenues and stuff. But when I think about how we can use AI to progress that education, if we can push it to a point where we can understand and have AI kind of figure out what would be acceptable, you know, learning videos or tools for a younger generation.
Kind of maybe giving it a moral compass?
Yes, then we could, moral compass, I guess? More of like trying to...
More like a filter.
Thank you. The filter is what I'm looking for. A proper filter. We still don't have that yet. We still... No. And I'm going to go back to YouTube. How many times do you hear content creators that are trying to push out news and education and all these other stuff say, oh, well, the algorithm basically pushed me away from recommendations because there was a keyword that I picked up that wasn't okay for me to use. This goes back to what we talked about before when we mentioned things about coronavirus.
There's a little disclaimer kind of thing.
Yes, and there was a lot of censorship on there to the point where it was like, oh, well, if you even mention coronavirus, we're just not going to push this out there. It's not okay because we don't know if it's, you know, false or true or false data or information that you're distributing to the public. That's where I feel like AI could potentially try to go into. To what extent, I don't know. I'm not a developer of any sorts, but I feel like you could push AI in that direction to start filtering things and determine what would be beneficial to push onto public. And that, again, goes on to different things because
I mean, that's a great point.
Yeah, because people will be like, oh, well, now you're saying that computers get to decide what's right and all this other stuff. There's a lot of stuff, but I'm trying to see the positive outcome to all this. That's my thought onto it. Do you have anything else that you might want to add?
No, I think you pretty much hit it on the nail, especially with that YouTube example at the end. Definitely having like this sort of, I don't want to say like an external body of judgment or anything, but just sort of some way to like ensure and kind of give confidence that the content of science or health communication that people are consuming is right or credible and whatnot. Yeah.
So, Dom, I think that concludes our conversation. Do you feel like it's a good point to end it?
I do. I think we pretty much hit the point, and like the AI or not AI, but technology and science and the disparities within them are huge topics. So having to concise it down to at least an hour's a task in on itself.
It's difficult to just kind of tackle every point because even with the conversation of AI, there's still a lot of different things, moral obligations, who gets to decide, how the distribution goes, all this sorts of stuff that we can keep discussing on. It's a massive topic.
And it's important to not just be complacent to whatever comes out. Like, it's important, just be holding people accountable, holding companies accountable for the stuff they produce.
I'm...
On the bright side, that's more interesting episodes for the future.
All right, so we planned this episode last month when I had you on. Should we tease what we have planned within the next month coming up, possibly? Do you even remember?
Okay, so I do.
Okay.
And it's funny that you mentioned that because it is such a huge issue now because of what's been going on.
Oh my God. That one's going to be a heavy episode.
I don't know if an hour will push
You know what would be interesting for that one to be a split up into a two-parter? Because
I'd be down for that.
Yeah, it'd be a two-parter more than likely. And it's more of a reason to keep bringing you back on. It's definitely more of a reason to keep bringing you back on, Dom. I really like our talks.
Not to keep the audience in suspense, the topic of next episode, if I'm correct, was politics in or the relationship of politics and science.
Yes. That conversation is extremely, extremely heavy. And I think it hits, because I think we kind of discussed on it just a little bit. Every one of these episodes is going to be connected in some shape or manner. No. But, it goes to show now more than ever how politics has an influence on, science is now, you wouldn't think that wearing a mask is a political issue. Somehow, it is
until
an
it's
issue.
made an issue.
Until now, it's a political issue, and it's like, dude, it's not. This is about freaking health. Like, this isn't even a question. It's ridiculous, you people. Come on.
No, but yeah, there's so many aspects to this question. Yeah, I definitely think a two-parter episode will.
A two-parter, and it would be interesting. You know what? I mean this. I'm gonna say this with a scientific mind, not as like, because I don't want to make it sound immoral or unethical.
Right.
But within a month's time, anything can happen. Because I will say this, Dom. When we talked last month, we were in quarantine. Afterwards, it opened up, and then we're back a month later, and we're back to what it was before. So anything can happen. We could have a downfall, a decrease in COVID cases. We can have a bigger increase. Wave 2.5. We might skip wave 2 and go straight into 2.5.
And like with how close the elections can be, definitely things can happen in terms of people's stances.
Yes, because now you're going to have a bigger push to try to educate this, the public, and essentially say well, are you going to side with the sciences, or are you going to side with something else? Like, are you going to deny what research has to say? We mentioned this in the first episode as well, where we said, politics has an influence in pretty much how science gets distributed or in the information. Is it okay to distribute this information out there, or should we hold that back because of political influence and stuff like that? We said it with who basically kind of tiptoed around the whole conversation of China and the COVID. So it's like, okay, well, that is a political motivation to do so. So there's definitely a lot to talk about. I will have you on next month, so hopefully around the same time. You know what? If anything, this might take us a little more time to set up, because you and I are going to have to talk about this away from the podcast to try to format this a little bit better. One, it is a sensitive topic. Two, we have to try to be as unbiased as possible. Of course,
which goes great with this whole conversation.
My goal is to try to be as unbiased as possible. Granted, it might not be 100% possible, because we both have our motivations and our sides and stuff like that. But I'm not going to let that be an issue that's going to prevent us.
We'll put in effort to try not to. Yeah,
exactly. That is the most important thing, because if we're doing this, we have to do it right to educate the public and the listeners who are watching this or listening to this. So we'll do. So
that was a nice teaser. Towards the future.
Hopefully within a month's time, and if not, closer to the end of August into September.
Honestly, any time before the election will be great.
Oh, because then trust me, that means that. Oh, trust me, I am already planning this inside my head. So we're good and set to go.
Okay.
Dom,
I'm sure we've gone way over the hour limit, but yeah,
it's fine, dude. You know how long it takes you to edit these podcasts? It's like no more than 30 minutes. It's not even that difficult, so it's all good. I just keep it to an hour, so that way it's easy to consume and not 2 hour longs and stuff like that. But before we wrap things up, Dom, is there anything you might want to plug in? Just repeat anything.
No, if you're really interested in social justice and the intersections between science and technology, I encourage you to reach out to resources that discuss this. There are a lot of readings and videos out there that deal with race and science and technology. It's a very rocky relationship, and one that probably warrants its own podcast or something. But
trust me, with you, there's endless possibilities of science and podcasting. It's ridiculous. So I'll have you back on over and over again, even after this whole science and political podcast. Trust me, we'll be talking. We'll be talking definitely more.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to have you, Dom. But I will plug in your socials in the description below. So that way, if people want to follow you, they can go ahead and do so. You're more active on Twitter?
I am, yeah. So my handle, it's a personal account, keep that in mind.
Yes.
Even though I post a bunch of science shit, I post a bunch of meme and gay shit. So the Twitter handle, if you want to follow me, is @DJNeuronNerd. For obvious reasons.
The science stuff that you do tweet is pretty interesting, and it does correlate with a lot of stuff that we do talk about. So it's interesting, even if it is a personal account. I would recommend following Dom and seeing what he posts and stuff like that. So definitely.
And I'm really all for interacting with followers as well.
And especially since you're pushing your health or science and science communication.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be bad to start now and
he's trying to push me to make a Okay. Oh, I thought you were gonna push me to make a podcast.
Oh, hang on. Wait until after the recording. We'll discuss it right now
Okay.
because I've been
Okay.
thinking about it. Yes. But his links will be in the description down below. If you are listening to this podcast on YouTube, head on over to the description and jump on over to the Spotify account. Follow that account as well. We will be posting the podcasts at the same time as the ones going up on YouTube. So depending on your listening platform, feel free to follow each one. If you're listening to Spotify, the description will have the links over to the YouTube channel. Hit subscribe over there. Give me a follow. I post podcasts every Friday at noon. Different topics. It isn't just science related. Last week we talked about the progressive nature in nerd media. We've had discussion in health and science literacy. We've talked about censorship. I bring a multiple of guests, and I encourage my listeners to give me any questions and criticism if you guys have any, so that way this podcast can be better. But with that said, I think it's time to wrap it up. Thank you, Dom, for being on this podcast again.
Of course,
cheers,
it's
my
always
friend.
a pleasure.
Cheers, my friend.
We worked hard for this whole setup, so I'm glad that we're enjoying it.
So we're going to talk afterwards because I kind of have an idea of how to probably stream this.
Yeah.
Last minute note. There might be a possibility I will be streaming these live on YouTube from here on out. So keep posted. I will be posting a video on there soon discussing that sort of stuff. With that said, thank you guys for listening to this episode of Drinking Matters. My name is Bryan. This was Dom. We'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.